At first, it seemed like just another charming royal moment, one that Britain had grown to know and love. The fourth in line to the British throne, Prince Louis, doing exactly what he does best. His signature expressions, the playful bursts of energy, the cheeky charm that had somehow made the British public feel unusually protective of him. But this time, something felt different. This wasn't just another cute clip to brighten up social media for a few seconds. This was bigger. The world had barely caught its breath after the whirlwind of recent royal health crises when Buckingham Palace released an announcement that would shift the entire narrative surrounding the royal family. This time, the story wasn't about the king, nor was it about the Princess of Wales. Instead, the focus was on the youngest and arguably the most spirited member of the royal family. And that was when you knew this wasn't just another routine update. Before we dive deeper into the heart of the matter, let me offer a word of caution. If you're someone who's tired of hearing the same royal headlines recycled over and over again, but are instead looking for stories that truly connect the dots and pull back the curtain on what's really going on behind closed doors, then make sure to subscribe. Not for the hype, but because what you're about to hear will make you see Prince Louis's future in an entirely new light, one that goes far beyond the headlines. The announcement exploded across major networks, cutting through the air like an emergency alert. Within minutes, cameras swarmed toward the palace gates. Reporters, the same voices that had covered wars, scandals, and royal resignations, sounded distinctly off-kilter. Their usual royal enthusiasm was absent. Instead, their voices carried a tone of concern, something more profound, more serious. This wasn't a typical update about royal engagements or ceremonial appearances. This wasn't about the royal family attending some gala or making a scheduled appearance at a public event. No, this was different. Buckingham Palace was revealing something deeply personal, profoundly human, and undeniably heartbreaking. It was about Prince Louis, the child who for years had been a source of joy and laughter at the palace. His laughter often too loud for royal halls, his energy so wild it couldn't be contained, and that mischievous innocence that had won the hearts of the nation when times were difficult. But now there was something else in the tone of the announcement, a sadness, a sorrow that couldn't be masked. Even insiders claimed they had been kept in the dark. There were no leaks, no behind-the-scenes whispers building up to this moment. The statement came straight from the palace press office, calm, measured, yet strangely emotional. The palace's statement began with the kind of phrasing they only use when they are bracing for something much more serious. The family appreciates the public's kindness as they navigate a private matter concerning Prince Louis. Anyone familiar with royal protocol knows that Buckingham doesn't use language like that unless something extraordinary has happened. And with that, speculation spread like wildfire. The question wasn't simply, what happened? It became, how serious is it if the palace is speaking like this? Some reports suggested that Louis wasn't dealing with a physical ailment, but something far more complex, emotional and psychological distress, quietly shaped by months of family turbulence. The king's ongoing health battles, Catherine's lengthy recovery, and the struggle to keep up appearances while the royal family weathered crisis after crisis. It all weighed heavily on the youngest member of the royal family, and it became clear this was no minor setback. Royal correspondents labeled the statement as one of the most unguarded Buckingham had ever released. It didn't feel like another calculated piece of image management. Instead, it felt like a family saying, "We can't carry this alone anymore." The nation's reaction was swift and immediate. Phones lit up, group chats buzzed. Even those who typically paid little attention to royal news felt a deep, sudden empathy. Because in that moment, Prince Louis wasn't just another royal figure. He was a child, a young boy who had once brought joy to the nation with his innocent balcony antics. But now, he found himself at the center of something far more serious. Calls were made in hushed tones, school officials were discreetly notified, scheduled royal appearances were quietly postponed, plans were rewritten behind closed doors, and within the walls of Buckingham Palace something had shifted, something profound, something that couldn't be undone with a quick smile or a playful gesture on a balcony. But then the situation took an even more serious turn. The palace statement wasn't the final word, it was only the beginning of an unfolding story. What came next wasn't a clarification, but a confession, and it came directly from Prince William. His words, delivered live and raw, cut through the air with such intensity that they instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. There was no performance, no polished royal composure, no grand podium moment. Prince William stepped forward not as a royal figure, but as a father caught in a spotlight he never asked for, standing there because silence had become too dangerous. The world held its breath. This wasn't about royal protocols anymore. This was a family in crisis, and it was about a child who was suffering. William didn't begin with formalities. Instead, there was a long, heavy pause, a silence so thick it felt like it carried the weight of months of sleepless nights filled with worry and exhaustion. Then, with quiet pain in his voice, he said the words that shattered the illusion of royal calm. "Louis has been struggling." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. You could feel the hurt in those words. This wasn't just a headline. This was a father, opening up about the pain of watching his son endure something no child should have to face. He spoke of the months that had blurred together in a haze of quiet suffering behind the palace walls. Catherine's illness had created a void in their home, a space a child couldn't name but could feel in every corner. The absence of her usual warmth, the uncertainty of her recovery, it had left a mark. And then the king's diagnosis only served to add fuel to the already raging storm. Yet it was their youngest son, their radiant little Louis, who seemed to bear the heaviest burden. The weight of it all fell on the smallest of shoulders. William described long, lonely nights when Louis would wander into their room, eyes wide with fear, unable to put his feelings into words. He didn't understand what was happening. He only knew that he needed to be close to someone who made him feel safe. William spoke about the sudden mood swings, how mornings that were once filled with joy would suddenly shift into tearful afternoons. He described how meals, once a family affair, would be interrupted by an unsettling silence, with Louis's plate barely touched. This wasn't misbehavior, it wasn't confusion, it was fear. It was the kind of fear that comes from a child trying to make sense of a world that suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. Then William revealed something that made the entire situation feel all the more painfully real. He admitted that in his attempts to shoulder the weight of the crown, his royal duties, and his family's well-being, he missed the signs. He said he had been juggling so many responsibilities, duty, crisis, appearances, medical updates, and the pressure to maintain a calm exterior, that he failed to see what was slipping through his fingers. But the moment that truly broke everyone came when William shared a simple yet gut-wrenching question from Louis that haunted him to his core. Is Mommy going to leave like Grandpa? It was a child's innocent question, but it collided head-on with the brutal reality of loss. It wasn't just heartbreaking, it exposed the profound depth of fear that had already taken root in Louis's young heart. That question forced William and Catherine to reassess everything, rethink their priorities, their schedules, and the way they were handling everything. This wasn't about managing the royal image anymore. This was about protecting their child, a boy caught in a storm of emotions that he couldn't possibly understand. With a heavy heart, William turned to the press, not with the usual royal authority, but with the raw vulnerability of a father. He asked for space, he asked for restraint. He's just a boy, William said, his voice soft yet firm, a plea for privacy in the face of an unimaginable burden. Let him heal in peace. In that moment, even the most hardened journalist stood in stunned silence. The weight of what had just been said hung in the air, and you could feel it. This family had reached a breaking point. But while William's heartfelt plea for privacy was being made, the truth had already slipped beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace, because this wasn't just about Louis anymore. It wasn't just about the public image of a royal child facing challenges. It was about what was happening behind closed doors within the family, quiet struggles that had been hidden from view for so long. Princess Charlotte, the calm, responsible older sister, who often seemed as though she had been born 10 years older than her age, was overheard sobbing to her nanny. He doesn't understand why she's not getting better. That single line hit the family like a shockwave. It revealed something devastating. Charlotte had been quietly carrying her brother's fear on her shoulders. She had been trying to shield him from the weight of the tension in the house, all the while struggling to manage her own heartbreak in silence. For weeks, Charlotte had stepped into a role no child should ever have to play. Why shielding Louis from the adult conversations, distracting him when the tension became too much, trying to keep things light when the air in their home grew too heavy. But even the most steady heart has its limits, and Charlotte's finally cracked. Louis, once a bright, energetic boy who had bounced into breakfast with the kind of energy that could light up the entire room, had changed. Now he was quiet. Meals were passed with his plate barely touched. Toys that once held his attention now lay forgotten. He spent hours alone, curled up, listless, not responding, even when Charlotte tried to pull him back into the laughter. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't misbehavior, it was confusion, it was fear. It was a child trying to make sense of a world that no longer felt safe. For William and Catherine, the cruelty wasn't just in Louis's illness. It was the dissonance between public perception and private reality. To the world, they still appeared as the perfect royal family, smiling portraits and carefully choreographed appearances. But behind the scenes, the truth was fragile. They were a family fighting to keep their children whole, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos. They began to discuss therapy quietly, cautiously, knowing that royal families do not seek help without consequences. The fear was obvious. What would the tabloids do with this? How quickly would compassion turn into a spectacle? The thought of their young son's emotional struggles being dissected in headlines was unbearable, but doing nothing was no longer an option. For weeks, Charlotte had taken on a role no child should ever be forced to play, shielding Louis from the weight of adult conversations, distracting him when the tension in the house grew too thick, trying to keep the atmosphere light when the air felt suffocating. She became a quiet protector, bearing a burden far too heavy for someone so young. But even the strongest of hearts have their breaking points, and Charlotte's finally cracked. Louis, once a whirlwind of energy, bounding into the room each morning with a spark that could light up the entire house, had changed. His usual exuberance, once a constant source of joy, had been replaced by silence. Meals passed by untouched. Toys that once brought him endless delight lay abandoned in corners. He began to spend hours alone, curled up, listless, barely responding, even when Charlotte tried to draw him back into the light-hearted play that once defined his days. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't defiance, it was confusion, it was fear. It was a child lost in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable, a world that no longer felt safe. For William and Catherine, the cruelty of it all wasn't just the illness, it was the stark contrast between how the world saw them and the reality behind their closed doors. The world saw the smiling portraits, the carefully orchestrated royal appearances, the poised, composed family. But behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, the truth was fragile, cracking under the pressure. A family that had once been the epitome of stoic composure was now fighting desperately to keep their children whole, to maintain some semblance of normalcy amidst the storm that had engulfed them. As the weight of it all grew heavier, they began to quietly consider therapy. The decision wasn't made lightly. Royal families don't seek help without consequences. There was an overwhelming fear that the tabloids would seize on this, that compassion would quickly turn into spectacle. The idea of their young son's emotional turmoil being torn apart in the public eye was unbearable. But doing nothing, pretending everything was fine, was no longer an option. The family could no longer hide the cracks in their facade. And then came the moment that solidified the truth. This wasn't just a rough patch, this was a crisis. It was an ordinary weekday until Prince Louis didn't show up for school. Teachers were discreetly notified. Classmates were confused, unsure of what was going on. And then quietly confirmation came through the proper channels. Prince Louis was being withdrawn immediately. There was no public explanation, no mention of a timeline, no talk of a temporary break, just an absence hanging in the air like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. Behind the scenes, the decision to pull him from school had been building for weeks. William and Catherine had watched helpless as their son seemed to unravel despite their best efforts to maintain some sense of normalcy for him. But the tipping point came after a seemingly innocent classroom moment, one that appeared to mean nothing to anyone else but hit Louis like a wall. What happens when a royal child breaks, not in public tantrums or scandals, but in silence? When the very walls designed to protect him, walls of royal duty and poise, become too heavy for a young heart to carry. This wasn't a story about crowns or ceremony. It wasn't about royal duty or public appearance. It was a story about a family forced to choose between image and humanity, and how one child's vulnerability reshaped the very fabric of what it means to be royal. This was the moment the family truly understood. Being a royal wasn't about playing the part, about fulfilling the expectations others had for them. It was about being human, and for the first time the royals made a choice that put their humanity above all else. Despite still navigating her own recovery, Catherine threw herself entirely into her son's care. She spent long hours by his side, reading softly to him, listening patiently, simply being present. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't rush him. In a world that demanded composure from everyone in the royal family, she offered him something different: constancy. Her strength, even in the face of her own exhaustion, became the solid anchor that Louis clung to in his darkest moments. Yet even her deep devotion couldn't change the hard truth. The situation remained fragile, and every decision now carried consequences that reached far beyond the family's walls. The world's eyes were on them. The palace could not afford another media storm. Their every move, every choice would be scrutinized under a magnifying glass. Behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Advisors began quietly drafting what they called a recovery plan, a long-term strategy designed to protect Prince Louis from the public's gaze, to give him the space he needed to heal. This wasn't about public appearances, about schooling or royal duties. This was about emotional safety. Carefully, psychological consultants were brought in. Staff were instructed to coordinate a lifestyle that would strip away the expectations of royal duty, at least temporarily. For the first time in modern royal history, a child was being allowed to heal in privacy without the pressure of performance. It was a seismic shift for the monarchy. Royal childhood had never been treated with such gentleness, such consideration for emotional well-being. And just as the family retreated inward, a surprising figure stepped forward: Princess Anne. Known for her resilience and no-nonsense honesty, Princess Anne brought exactly what the family needed: stability without sentimentality. What she offered Louis became the first real spark of light in what had been weeks of emotional darkness. The plan began with a quiet conversation between Anne and William. There were no aides, no royal protocol, just two siblings bound by duty and their shared love for the next generation. William, visibly exhausted, admitted something he had struggled to say aloud. He no longer knew how to reach his son. Catherine was doing everything she could, but Louis remained emotionally distant. His once abundant joy had been buried beneath a cloud of fear and confusion. Anne didn't offer empty words of comfort. She didn't soften the truth. Instead, she made a simple yet profound proposal that startled William. Send him to me. Let him work with his hands. Let him listen to birds instead of whispers. And just like that, the plan was set into motion. There would be no grand announcements, no press releases to fan the flames of speculation. It was a quiet relocation to Anne's country estate, far from the cameras, far from the expectations, and closer to something Louis hadn't felt in months: peace. Within days, a new rhythm took hold in Louis's life. Mornings no longer began with royal duties or lessons, but with the simplicity of routine, small, grounding tasks like gardening, watering plants, clearing leaves. Anne worked beside him, sharing stories not about crowns or royal scandals, but of horses, scraped knees, and childhood mischief with her brother Charles. Slowly, something began to shift within Louis. He started to ask questions again. He smiled. He laughed. The weight of his fear didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. Anne's approach wasn't soft or indulgent. It was steady, unwavering. For a boy trapped in emotional turmoil, her constant, reliable presence became a lifeline he desperately needed. One afternoon, Anne introduced him to the stables. Horseback riding, she explained with a quiet authority, isn't about spectacle, it's about trust, control, and confidence. Louis took to it instinctively. Each ride carried him farther, not just across fields, but away from fear. The boy who had once refused to leave his room was now riding into open space, the wind stripping away the weight of his fears, taking with it the emotions he couldn't express. Watching from a distance, Anne knew that she had found the way forward, not through rigid royal protocols or polished statements, but through simplicity, responsibility, and connection. She had given him the space to breathe, the space to simply be. Behind the scenes, Anne became a trusted confidant for both William and Catherine. She didn't sugarcoat the truth, but her presence offered them reassurance they hadn't felt in Mont. In one deeply emotional exchange, she reportedly told Catherine, "He's got Diana's fire, he just needs direction." That sentence hit harder than anyone could have anticipated. Diana, too, had once been misunderstood, and now it was her grandson rediscovering his own light under the guidance of a woman who understood better than most the cost of royal silence. But what Anne had offered Louis wasn't just a way out of his grief, it was a way forward. That sentence landed like thunder. Diana, too, had once been misunderstood, her light dimmed by the weight of royal expectations and the cruelty of public scrutiny. Now it was her grandson, Louis, who was rediscovering his own light, not under the glare of royal duties, but under the guidance of a woman who understood better than most the cost of silence, the cost of pretending. Princess Anne, herself no stranger to the pressures of the monarchy, knew exactly what it took to stand firm in the face of personal and public turmoil. And in that quiet, steady guidance, Louis began to find his way again. But just as Louis's world began to find some semblance of stability, forces beyond the family's control were already moving quietly, deliberately. The hidden machinery of the royal institution, always at work behind the scenes, had already begun its motion. A document marked strictly internal had circulated among senior aides, passing hands through the halls of Buckingham Palace. It was a confidential document, carefully crafted, its purpose known only to a select few. But somehow it found its way into the hands of a disturbed staffer, someone who, for reasons unknown, felt compelled to leak it to a well-connected journalist. Within hours, the document's cold, clinical language exploded across media outlets, stripping away any semblance of privacy. The strategic phrasing, the carefully constructed sentences laid bare the family's most intimate decisions they had hoped to keep behind closed doors. The language of the document was sharp and impersonal, designed to appear methodical, almost robotic in its detachment. Yet for those who understood its implications, it felt like a violation, a ruthless dissection of what was supposed to remain private. The media seized on it with relentless force, dissecting every phrase, every word. The story that emerged from the document, stripped of its humanity and soaked in royal strategy, became yet another spectacle for the public. It wasn't just a leak, it was the beginning of a storm, one that would force the royal family to grapple once again with the reality of their position in the public eye. In their attempt to protect their child, to preserve his healing and his dignity, they found themselves drawn back into the very thing they had worked so hard to avoid, the relentless spotlight.